There's a moment life doesn't just hurt you, it dismantles you. Not gently, not fairly. It takes what you trusted, what you leaned on, and removes it without explanation. And suddenly, you're not asking how to win anymore. You're asking how to stand. This isn't a story about motivation. This is about what comes after everything falls apart. Number one, breaking is not failure, it is exposure. It is the moment when the structure you trusted can no longer hold the weight placed on it. Failure is often imagined as a verdict, a final judgment on your worth or competence, but breaking is something different entirely. Breaking happens when pressure meets weakness, when reality presses hard enough to reveal what was already unstable. It doesn't mean you were wrong to try. It means something in the system, your habits, beliefs, environment, or expectations, was not strong enough to sustain the load. That distinction matters because failure suggests an ending, while breaking signals a point of truth. When something breaks, it becomes visible. Cracks form where there was once a smooth surface. What was hidden by momentum and routine is now impossible to ignore. This is uncomfortable because it removes denial. You can no longer rely on appearances or hope that things will somehow work themselves out. But clarity, even painful clarity, is valuable. Breaking forces honesty. It tells you exactly where reinforcement is needed and where false confidence was doing the work of real strength. In that sense, breaking is diagnostic. It reveals information you could not access while everything appeared functional. People confuse breaking with weakness because they equate endurance with virtue. But endurance without structure is just delay. You can carry a collapsing load for a while, but eventually the strain shows up in exhaustion, resentment, anxiety, or collapse. Breaking doesn't mean you lacked character. Often it means you carried too much alone, ignored warning signs, or tried to live on borrowed strength. It means you were human in a system that demanded more than you had prepared for. That realization is not an insult, it's a starting point. There is also a strange integrity in breaking. Pretending you are intact when you are not requires constant deception, mostly toward yourself. Once you break, that performance ends. You are forced to deal with reality as it is, not as you wished it to be. This moment strips away unnecessary complexity. The question is no longer how to look successful, impressive, or admired. The question becomes what is essential, what is stable, and what can actually be rebuilt to last under pressure. Breaking does not erase value, it redistributes it. What survives the breaking is what matters most. The rest was excess, illusion, or scaffolding that outlived its usefulness. When you accept that breaking is not failure, you stop treating collapse as proof of inadequacy and start seeing it as feedback from life itself, pointing directly at what must change, what must be strengthened, and what must be rebuilt from the ground up, slowly, deliberately, without shortcuts, without pretending, without the need to prove anything to anyone else. Only the quiet responsibility of taking what is exposed and working with it honestly. Number two, pain strips illusions because it removes the luxury of pretending. When life is comfortable, you can afford false narratives about who you are, what you deserve, and how stable your world really is. You can believe effort is optional, that relationships are unconditional, that time will wait for you, and that consequences belong to other people. Comfort allows stories to survive without being tested. Pain does not. Pain interrupts the narrative and demands attention. It forces reality to speak louder than hope, louder than intention, louder than self-image. And once that happens, the illusion loses its grip. Illusions exist to protect you from fear, uncertainty, and responsibility. They tell you that you are in control when you are not, that things will work out without sacrifice, and that identity is something you declare rather than something you earn through action. Pain cuts through these ideas with precision. It doesn't argue with them. It simply makes them unusable. When you are hurting, empty beliefs offer no shelter. You cannot think your way out of pain with slogans or optimism. You are forced to confront what is real, what you neglected, what you avoided, and what you depended on that was never guaranteed. Pain also exposes the difference between appearance and substance. What looks strong in good conditions often collapses under stress. Confidence that depends on praise disappears when approval is withdrawn. Relationships built on convenience fracture when loyalty becomes costly. Self-worth tied to success evaporates the moment success leaves. Pain reveals what was conditional and what was solid. It shows you where your identity was outsourced and where your values were untested. This exposure is brutal because it removes comforting lies, but it is also clarifying because it leaves behind what actually remains when nothing else is supporting you. There is a harsh intelligence in pain. It directs your attention to what matters by making everything else unbearable. Distractions lose their appeal. Performances feel exhausting. You stop caring about impressing others and start caring about survival, meaning, and stability. Pain simplifies your priorities not by choice, but by necessity. It forces you to confront questions you avoided when life was easy, what you are willing to endure, what you are willing to change, and what you are willing to take responsibility for when no one is watching. When pain strips illusions, it does not replace them with comfort or certainty. It replaces them with truth. And truth is often heavy, slow, and demanding. It requires you to see yourself without filters, without excuses, and without the protective stories you once relied on. But once the illusion is gone, you are no longer negotiating with a fantasy. You are dealing with reality directly, and reality, while unforgiving, is workable, honest, and capable of supporting real growth if you are willing to meet it without resistance. Number 3, responsibility begins after collapse because before that moment, responsibility is often theoretical. It exists as an idea, something you plan to take on later, once conditions improve or once you feel more capable. As long as things are functioning, even poorly, you can postpone ownership. You can blame circumstances, people, timing, or bad luck. Collapse removes that option. When the structure falls, there is nothing left to hide behind. The question is no longer who caused it or why it happened. The only question that remains is what you are going to do with what is left. Collapse is disorienting because it strips away direction along with stability. The old rules no longer apply, and the strategies that once worked now feel useless. This is where responsibility becomes real, not heroic or dramatic, but practical and uncomfortable. It shows up in small, unglamorous decisions, getting up when you feel defeated, telling the truth when it costs you, choosing discipline when motivation is gone. Responsibility after collapse is not about fixing everything at once. It is about refusing to make the damage worse. It is the decision to stop leaking energy through self-pity, resentment, or avoidance, and to start conserving it for rebuilding. Many people misunderstand responsibility as self-blame, but they are not the same. Self-blame looks backward and paralyzes. Responsibility looks forward and demands action. After collapse, blaming yourself endlessly serves no purpose. The damage is already done. Responsibility means accepting that, regardless of how the collapse happened, your life is now in your hands. It means recognizing that no one is coming to restore what was lost, and no explanation will rebuild what was destroyed. That realization is heavy, but it is also stabilizing because it returns agency to you at the exact moment you feel you have none. Taking responsibility after collapse requires humility. You must admit that some of your assumptions were wrong, that some of your choices were careless or incomplete, and that some of your strengths were imagined rather than earned. This admission is painful because it attacks pride, but pride is fragile and expensive to maintain. Humility, while uncomfortable, is efficient. It allows learning. It allows correction. It allows you to rebuild on something sturdier than hope or confidence alone. Responsibility also demands patience. After collapse, progress is slow and often invisible. There are no dramatic transformations, only repetition, consistency, and restraint. You rebuild by showing up when it feels pointless, by honoring commitments when no one rewards you, and by choosing long-term stability over short-term relief. Responsibility begins when you stop asking how to feel better and start asking what needs to be done, even if the answer is boring, exhausting, and thankless, even if it requires sacrificing comfort, image, and certainty, even if the only proof of progress is that you are slightly more capable today than you were yesterday. Number 4, strength is rebuilt deliberately because whatever collapsed did so for a reason, and that reason cannot be overcome by enthusiasm or intention alone. After loss, failure, or disintegration, there is often a temptation to rush forward, to prove resilience by moving fast, speaking loudly, or forcing optimism. But speed is not strength, and noise is not stability. Real strength grows slowly, under controlled pressure, through repeated choices that are often invisible to everyone except the person making them. Deliberate rebuilding means you stop chasing the appearance of recovery and start focusing on the quiet work of becoming capable again. Deliberation requires awareness. You must first understand what broke and why. This is not about obsession or self-criticism, but about accuracy. If you rebuild without understanding the weak points, you will recreate the same structure that failed you before. Strength is not just added on top of damage, it is constructed differently. This often means abandoning familiar habits, identities, and coping mechanisms that once felt comfortable but proved unreliable. Deliberate rebuilding is uncomfortable because it asks you to give up what feels natural in exchange for what actually works. There is also restraint involved in rebuilding strength. You learn to say no to impulses that offer quick relief but long-term fragility. You resist the urge to compare your progress to others or to measure yourself by external approval. Deliberate strength does not come from constant stimulation or reassurance. It comes from repetition, from showing up consistently in small ways, and from tolerating boredom, frustration, and uncertainty without escaping into distraction. This kind of discipline is not dramatic, but it is durable. Rebuilding strength deliberately also changes your relationship with pain. Instead of seeing pain as something to avoid at all costs, you learn to treat it as information. Pain tells you when you are pushing too hard, when you are avoiding necessary effort, or when something needs adjustment. You stop reacting emotionally to every discomfort and start responding intelligently. This shift is subtle but powerful. It turns suffering into feedback rather than a verdict on your worth or progress. Over time, deliberate rebuilding creates a different kind of confidence. It is not loud or performative. It does not depend on validation or constant success. It is the confidence that comes from knowing you can endure strain without collapsing, that you can adapt when conditions change, and that you can rely on your own habits rather than temporary motivation. Strength rebuilt this way is quieter, heavier, and harder to shake, because it is grounded in action rather than belief, in consistency rather than hope, in structure rather than emotion, and in the accumulated proof that you can carry responsibility without breaking again. Number 5, resentment keeps you broken because it binds your attention to the very moment that wounded you and refuses to let it pass. It feels justified, even protective, as if holding on to anger preserves dignity or proves that what happened mattered. But resentment is not a shield, it is a tether. It ties your present to a past you cannot change and demands that you keep reliving it in order to feel morally correct. While it may feel like strength, it quietly drains energy, focus, and agency, leaving you stuck in the aftermath of an event that has already taken its toll. Resentment thrives on comparison and imagined fairness. It constantly asks why someone else escaped consequences, why life was unequal, or why your effort was not rewarded. These questions have no resolution because the world does not answer them. Instead of producing clarity, they deepen frustration and reinforce helplessness. The longer resentment is entertained, the more it reshapes identity. You stop being someone who was hurt and become someone who is defined by being wronged. This shift is subtle but dangerous because it encourages passivity while pretending to be moral resistance. Holding resentment also distorts perception. Every new experience is filtered through the lens of past injustice. Neutral events feel hostile. Ambiguous actions feel intentional. Opportunities are dismissed because they do not compensate for what was lost. Resentment convinces you that moving forward means betraying your pain, as if growth invalidates suffering. In reality, the opposite is true. Staying resentful does not honor what you endured, it extends it. It allows the original damage to continue shaping your decisions long after the event itself has ended. Resentment is especially destructive because it disguises itself as memory and principle. You tell yourself you are simply remembering accurately or standing by your values. But remembering without learning is stagnation, and principles that prevent progress become prisons. Resentment refuses responsibility by outsourcing control to the offender, the circumstance, or the past. As long as someone else is to blame for how you feel now, you are relieved of the burden of changing. That relief is temporary, and the cost is long-term stagnation. Letting go of resentment does not mean excusing what happened or denying its impact. It means refusing to let it dictate your future. It means reclaiming the attention and energy that resentment consumes and redirecting them toward rebuilding stability, capability, and meaning. When resentment loosens its grip, movement becomes possible again. You stop measuring your life against what should have been and start dealing with what is. Only then can repair begin. because a mind occupied with resentment has no space to construct anything new, no flexibility to adapt, and no strength left to carry responsibility forward without dragging the weight of the past into every decision. Number 6. Meaning is forged from suffering because suffering forces confrontation with reality in its rawest form. When comfort disappears, you are left without distraction, without illusions, and without the protection of easy narratives. Life stops negotiating with your preferences and demands that you respond to what is, not what you hoped for. In those moments, meaning does not appear as inspiration or sudden clarity. It emerges slowly, through endurance, through attention, and through the refusal to collapse inward. Suffering narrows your focus until only what truly matters remains, and within that narrow space, meaning begins to take shape. Suffering exposes the limits of pleasure-based motivation. When things hurt deeply enough, pleasure is no longer a reliable guide. You cannot distract yourself out of pain indefinitely, and you cannot comfort your way into strength. What remains is the question of why you should continue at all. Meaning answers that question not by removing pain, but by giving pain a direction. It reframes endurance as contribution, as sacrifice in service of something beyond immediate relief. Without suffering, that question rarely becomes urgent, and without urgency, meaning stays abstract and optional. There is a structural relationship between suffering and responsibility. When you suffer, you are forced to decide whether your pain will make you smaller or more capable. Meaning emerges when you choose to carry suffering consciously rather than reactively. This choice does not change the fact of pain, but it changes its function. Pain becomes a signal, a weight, a test of values. You discover what you are willing to endure and what you are willing to change. In that discovery, meaning begins to form, not as an idea, but as a pattern of action repeated under strain. Suffering also strips away trivial goals. Ambition without depth collapses quickly when tested by hardship. Status, image, and external validation lose their power when survival, integrity, and stability are at stake. What replaces them is a quieter orientation toward usefulness and responsibility. Meaning grows when your actions are aligned with something larger than your comfort, when your effort contributes to order rather than chaos, and when your response to suffering reduces harm instead of spreading it. Meaning forged from suffering is durable because it has been tested. It is not dependent on mood or circumstance. It does not vanish when things improve because it was not created in ease. It carries the memory of pain without being ruled by it. This kind of meaning stabilizes identity because it is grounded in lived experience rather than belief. It gives suffering a place in the story of your life, not as a meaningless interruption, but as the pressure that shaped your values, refined your priorities, and forced you to decide who you would become when comfort was no longer available. Life didn't break you to end you. It stripped you down to what's real. What remains is not weakness, but raw material. If you carry the weight honestly and rebuild with intention, what rises from suffering will be stronger than what comfort ever allowed.